She was forced to dance for cruel men. The mafia boss said, "You'll only dance for joy now." The Velvet Serpent Club was a place where dreams went to die, suffocated by cigar smoke and the smell of stale whiskey. It was a wound in the side of Port Astoria, festering in the dim, neon-lit alleyways of the Wharf District inside. The laughter was too loud, the music a dull throb that vibrated in the chest, and the air thick with the kind of desperation that clung to the velvet-flocked wallpaper. On a small, rickety stage, bathed in a sickly pink spotlight, Lena Moretti danced. She was 23 years old, but her eyes held the weary gaze of someone much older. Her body, once trained for the grand stages of the world, was now a commodity, a performance for the leering, drunken men who packed the tables below. They shouted, they whistled, they threw wadded-up bills. Lena saw none of them. She had perfected the art of detachment. As her body executed a flawless arabesque, her mind was miles away. Behind a wall of glass she had built, brick by painful brick, she was not here. She was not in this cheap, tarnished costume that smelled of sweat and fear. She was not dancing for them. She was somewhere else, somewhere safe. A loud, wet laugh erupted from a table near the front. A heavy-set man with a gold watch raised his glass. "More, little bird! Show us more!" Lena's expression did not flicker. Her gaze remained fixed on a point just above their heads. At the back of the grimy room, she transitioned into a series of fouettes, her form perfect, her face a mask of serene emptiness. Each turn was a mechanical, precise act of defiance. They could have her body's movement, but they could not have her. Her mind drifted, as it always did, to the light. The memory was so bright it almost hurt. A stage, wide and wooden, polished to a high gleam, the warmth of 1,000 lights on her skin. She was 19 again, a freshman on a full scholarship at the city's most prestigious conservatory, the scent of rosin and new point shoes, the swell of the orchestra from the pit. Her father, his face beaming with a pride that lit her from the inside out, sitting in the third row, center. He'd always been in the third row. He had promised her he would be there when she debuted at the Lincoln Center. The fouette faltered, just for a second, a tiny wobble that only she would notice. The memory always cuts sharp. The scholarship was gone. The conservatory was a ghost. Her father was dead. The light of that memory snapped off, replaced by the damp chill of the Port Astoria morgue, the sterile sheet, the detective's tired, sympathetic questions. "Gambling debts, Miss Moretti. It looks like he owes a lot of money to some very bad people." Those bad people had not been satisfied with his life. They had come for the collateral. They had come for her. Anton Costa, the owner of the Velvet Serpent, had paid her father's debt, and in return, he owned her. The club replaced the conservatory. The grand stage was replaced by this sticky, beer-stained platform. Her dream of dancing for the world was twisted into this nightly nightmare of dancing for cruel men. The music faded, ending on a low, synthesized whine. Lena held her final pose, arms raised, chin up, her chest aching from the effort of breathing the foul air. The applause was a sloppy, drunken noise. She bowed, the movement fluid and graceful. A pearl dropped in mud, then she turned and walked off the stage, the glass wall still firmly in place. She did not make it 2 steps into the dim backstage hallway before a hand clamped down on her arm. "You think you're too good for my customers?" Lena flinched, the glass wall shattering instantly. She looked up into the oily, smiling face of Anton Costa. He was a man whose cologne could not mask the rot underneath. He was squeezing her bicep, his thumb digging into the muscle. "Anton, please," she whispered, trying to pull away. "Please." He laughed, a wet, gravelly sound. "Mr. Petrov in the VIP room requested your company. He's a very important client. He wanted you to sit with him, have a drink. And you," he hissed, pulling her closer, "told the waitress you were unwell." "I'm a dancer," Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. "That was the agreement. I dance. I don't sit." "The agreement," Costa mocked, "is whatever I say it is. The agreement is you work off your father's debt, a debt that, let me remind you, is very, very large. You are here." He squeezed harder, and she bit back a cry of pain. "Because I allow you to be. I protect you from the other men your father owed. Do you understand what they would do to you if I sold your debt?" Tears pricked her eyes, hot and angry. She understood perfectly. Costa was a trafficker, a brute, but he was, in his own twisted way, the devil she knew. "I need you to be compliant, Lena. I need you to smile. That sad-faced ballet nonsense works on the floor. But when a client wants your time, you give it, or I will find other ways for you to be useful. Now go to the dressing room and fix your face. You're on again in 30 minutes. He shoved her away. Lena stumbled, catching herself on the peeling wall. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around her middle and hurried down the hall, the sound of his laughter following her. At that same moment, across town, Nico Romano sat in the dark. His penthouse office was silent, overlooking the glittering, indifferent lights of Port Astoria. At 33, Nico commanded the city's underworld with a chilling, mathematical precision. He was the boss of the Romano Syndicate, a position he had inherited from his father and fortified with his own cold, calculating intellect. He was a man of shadows and steel, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than most men made in a year. "He's getting sloppy." Nico's voice was low, measured, cutting through the silence. His right-hand man, Marco, stood near the window, a silhouette against the city. Costa was always a small-time boss, a pimp with a liquor license. But this is new. He's moving into trafficking, hard goods, and people. Nico swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly. He's not smart enough to do it alone, but he's brazen enough to cause problems. He's bringing in shipments from Eastern Europe, girls who don't speak the language, and he's not paying tribute. He's not staying in his lane. He's drawing attention, the kind of attention that costs us all money. "What do you want to do?" Marco asked. "I can have his supply lines cut by morning." Nico took a slow sip. He hated loose ends. He hated incompetence. And he hated, more than anything, men who built their empires on the backs of the truly weak. It was bad for business. It was distasteful. "No," Nico said, standing up. "This one. I want to see for myself. I want to look this little man in the eye. I want to see his operation, see who he's bought, and see what he's selling." He straightened his tie, his reflection a pale, sharp-edged ghost in the floor-to-ceiling window. "Get the car. We're going to the Velvet Serpent." The arrival of Nico Romano at the club was a silent explosion. The bouncer, a mountain of a man who usually grunted and shoved, turned pale and simply opened the door. The music seemed to dip in volume. The patrons, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, quieted. Costa, who had been laughing with a client, froze. His smile twitched, then vanished. Nico walked through the room as if he owned it, which, in a way, he did. He owned the land it was on, the distributor that sold it liquor, and the politicians that allowed it to operate. Marco was a step behind him, his eyes scanning every exit, every face. Nico's gaze swept the room, taking in the desperation, the cheap furniture, the forced atmosphere, as he would later call it. He was immediately, profoundly disturbed. This was not business. This was a pigsty. And then he saw her. Lena was back on stage, caught in the same pink light. She was in the middle of a slow, agonizingly beautiful adagio. Her movements were filled with a sorrow so deep, so profound, it seemed to pour from her like a physical aura. She was the only clean thing in the entire filthy room. Nico stopped, his head tilting slightly. He was a man who traded in power and control. He understood violence, money, and loyalty. He did not understand this. He did not understand the quiet, heartbreaking grace of this girl's performance. He saw her detachment, but he also saw the pain it was meant to hide. He saw the prisoner inside the dancer. And he was, for the first time in a very long time, captivated. Lena, sensing a change in the room's energy, let her gaze drop from the back wall. The air felt colder, heavier. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked, just for a second, with his. She saw a man unlike any who had ever watched her here. He was not drunk. He was not leering. He was still dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was sharp, handsome in a severe, dangerous way, but it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, intelligent, and unsettlingly clear. He was not just looking at her, he was seeing her. A jolt of pure, undiluted fear shot through her. This man was not a customer. He was something else, something far more dangerous. Lena snapped her gaze away, back to the safety of the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nico did not look away. When the music ended, she fled the stage. Costa intercepted Nico before he could take another step, his face a mask of nervous sweat and false welcome. "Mr. Romano, what an honor. I had no idea you were coming. Please, my best table. Anything you want, in the house." "I'm not here for a drink, Anton," Nico said, his voice quiet but carrying easily over the thrum of the music. Of course. Business," Costa stammered. "But first, a gift, a welcome." He snapped his fingers. A moment later, Lena was being pushed forward by one of Costa's thugs. She was trembling, her head down, a thin robe clutched around her costume. "Our best girl," Costa said, grinning, shoving her toward Nico. "Lena, she's a true artist. She's yours. For the night, as a sign of my respect." Lena flinched, bracing for the inevitable. Nico looked at her. He saw the terror in the line of her shoulders, the way she refused to meet his eyes. He saw the faint, finger-shaped bruise on her arm, stark against her pale skin. Then he looked at Costa, his expression turning to ice. "I came for business," Nico said, his voice flat and cold. "Not toys." The words hung in the air, a brutal dismissal. Lena's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Costa's grin evaporated. "Go," Nico said, his gaze fixed on Costa. But the command meant for her. Lena didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled back, disappearing into the shadows of the backstage hallway, her heart pounding, a frantic, confused rhythm. The moment she was gone, Nico turned his full attention to the club owner. "We need to talk," he said, "about your new shipments and your new inventory." Costa's face went pale. "My office, Mr. Romano, this way." As Lena fled, shaken to the relative safety of the dressing room, Nico Romano confronted Costa in his cramped, foul-smelling office. He spoke for 10 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He laid out Costa's operation, from the shipping containers to the shell companies, with surgical precision. He made it clear that Costa's expansion into human trafficking was a liability the Romano syndicate would not tolerate. "You're attracting federal attention, Anton," Nico finished, standing over the sweating man. "You are a rat making too much noise in the wall. Stop it, shut it down, or I will burn the wall down around you." He left without another word. In the back of his armored sedan, the city light sliding over his impassive face, Nico was silent for several blocks. Marco drove, not speaking, waiting. "That girl," Nico said finally, his voice thoughtful. "The dancer. Lena." "Boss? Find out everything," Nico ordered. "Her family, her history, how she ended up in that place. And while you're at it, I want a complete file on Costa's entire trafficking operation. Names, dates, buyers, all of it." Marco glanced at him in the rearview mirror. It was a strange, dual command. One was business, the other was not. "I'll have it by morning," he said, miles away, in the dungeon-like basement dressing room of the Velvet Serpent. Lena Moretti sat on a wobbly stool. The other girls gave her a wide berth, sensing the lingering chill of her encounters with both Costa and the dark stranger. She waited until she was alone. The room was empty, save for the buzz of a dying fluorescent light and the distant, muffled bass from the club above. She pulled her bag from a rusted locker and took out a pair of worn, satin ballet shoes. The ribbons were frayed, the toes battered and scarred. They were the last piece of her old life, the last gift from her father before he died. She clutched them to her chest, the worn satin soft against her skin. The glass wall was gone. The detachment had fled. There was only the cold, stark reality of her prison. Lena bowed her head, and for the first time that night, she cried. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking, mourning the girl who had danced in the light, unaware that someone had finally taken an interest in her, not for her body, but for the truth. Unaware that a man had just set a match to the fuse of her cage, the night after the dark stranger's visit, the velvet serpent felt different. The air was sour with Anton Costa's agitation. He was pacing the hallways, snapping at the waitresses, and the bouncers seemed to carry an extra layer of menace. Lena felt the tension like a drop in barometric pressure, a storm waiting to break. She was careful to keep her head down, to be invisible. But Costa's rules were meant to be broken. In the dim hallway leading to the dressing room, she saw one of the new waitresses, a girl who looked barely 18. Huddled near the service exit, the girl was crying, her thin shoulders shaking, a tray of dirty glasses trembling in her hands. Lena's feet stopped before her mind could protest. She glanced down the hall. Costa was by the bar. "Hey," Lena whispered, her voice soft. The girl jumped, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm sorry, I dropped a glass." "It's okay," Lena said, a reflex of kindness she hadn't been able to kill. "Just breathe. When you go back out, don't look them in the eye. Look at their chins. They can't tell the difference. And it's safer." The girl nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "Thank you." "Lena?" The voice was cold, directly behind her. Lena froze. She turned slowly. Anton Costa was standing there, his face a mask of cold fury. "What did I tell you about fraternizing?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "What did I say about making friends?" "She was just upset," Lena stammered. "I don't care," Costa hissed. He grabbed the new girl by the arm. "Get back to work, now." The girl scrambled away, disappearing into the kitchen. Costa turned his attention back to Lena. "You think you're a den mother? You think you run this place? You are alone. Lena, the second you forget, that is the second you become worthless to me. No alliances, no friends. Do you understand me?" He didn't touch her, but his eyes were a physical weight, crushing her. She nodded, her throat tight. "Good, now get on stage, and try to look less like a funeral." Lena fled to the dressing room, her hands shaking. The small, defiant spark of kindness was extinguished, replaced by the familiar cold of fear. She was alone. He was right. An hour later, she was on stage. The music started, and she began her routine, her mind already building the glass wall, brick by brick. Then the air in the room changed. It was the same feeling as the night before, a sudden, cold vacuum. The sloppy, drunken noise of the crowd seemed to fade. She didn't have to look. She knew. He was here. Her eyes, against her will, darted to the back of the room. He sat in a dark, recessed booth, the same one he had occupied before, dressed in the same immaculate dark suit. He was a shadow cut from a different cloth. Marco, his silent sentinel, stood near the wall. Nico wasn't drinking. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just watching her. It was not the leering gaze of the other men. It was not the predatory hunger of Anton Costa. It was something else. It was analytical, intense, and deeply unnerving. He watched her as a wolf might watch a storm, with a quiet, patient, and absolute focus. He was not there for business. He was there to observe. Lena's breath caught. She missed a step, a tiny stumble that made her ankle ache. She recovered instantly, but her face burned. The glass wall was useless. She could feel his gaze on her skin, a cold fire. When the music finally, blessedly ended, she practically ran from the stage. She didn't wait for the applause. She was halfway to the dressing room when one of Costa's men, a thick-necked brute named Boris, stepped in front of her. "Not so fast," he grunted. "Mr. Romano, he wants to see you." Lena's heart stopped. "No, I don't do that. I'm a dancer, Costa knows." "Costa said yes," Boris interrupted, his patience thin. "The VIP room, he said strictly to talk. Now move." Fear, sharp and acidic, flooded her mouth. Strictly to talk was a lie she had heard before. It was the same lie Costa told the girls before he sold them for an hour, or a night. Boris shoved her from behind and Lena stumbled forward, her feet moving on their own. She was led to the private room on the second floor, the one with the thick, soundproof door. Boris opened it, pushed her inside, and shut it behind her, the click of the lock echoing in the small space. He was alone. Nico Romano was not sitting. He stood by the room's single grimy window, looking out at the alley below. The room was suffocatingly plush, all red velvet and dark wood, and it smelled of old cigar smoke and power. Lena's back was pressed against the door, her hands fisted at her sides, ready to fight or to bolt. "Come in, Lena," he said, his voice calm. He didn't turn around. "I'm not going to touch you." She didn't move. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest. "What do you want?" He turned slowly. In the dim light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. His eyes were dark and unreadable. "I want to know your story." "I don't have a story," she said, her voice thin. "Lena Moretti. I am 23 years old. You were a scholarship student at the Port Astoria Conservatory of Dance. First in your class. Your professors said you were singular. Then, 2 years ago, you dropped out." The words hit her harder than a slap. He knew her name. He knew her real life. The glass wall, her only defense, evaporated. "How do you know that?" "I know many things," he said. He gestured to a chair in the corner. Far from him. "Sit down, please." She was too stunned to disobey. She perched on the absolute edge of the cushion. Her muscles coiled. "Are you here by choice?" Nico asked, his gaze pinning her. It was the most dangerous question anyone could ask. The lie was automatic, a reflex honed by 2 years of survival. "This is my job. I'm a dancer." Nico studied her, his expression unchanging. He was impossibly still. "Try again." A shiver ran down her spine. He was not a man you could lie to. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses on her fingers from a life that was no longer hers. "My father, he had debts, gambling, and he's dead," Nico stated. It was not a question. Hot tears pricked her eyes. She hated this man for knowing. She hated him for making her say it. She nodded, biting her lips so hard she tasted blood. "Yes. And Costa? He took over the debt," she whispered. The lie was so familiar it felt like the truth. "I'm working it off. How much do you owe?" "I don't know," she admitted, the words tasting like ash. "I dance, and he pays for my apartment, for food. He says the interest just keeps going up." Nico nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed something he already knew. He saw the trap, elegant in its cruelty. His eyes drifted from her face to her arm, where she was clutching her elbow. He saw the faint yellowish-purple shadow of fingers, just visible past the edge of her sleeve, Costa's marks from the night before. "Who did that to you?" he asked, his voice softer now, which was somehow more terrifying. Lena instinctively yanked her sleeve down. "Nothing. I'm clumsy. I bumped into a door." She looked up and met his eyes. He knew she was lying. She knew he knew. A long, charged silence stretched between them. He was a monster. She was sure of it. He was the boss of men like Costa, but he was the first person in 2 years who had not looked at her like she was a piece of meat. He looked at her like she was a person, a puzzle. She was more afraid of him than she had ever been of Costa. "You should go," he said finally, breaking the spell. He turned back to the window. "Your next set is starting." Lena stared at his back for a second, her mind reeling. He was dismissing her. He hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't touched her. She scrambled to her feet and fled the room, pulling the door open and rushing past the stone-faced Marco. She ran down the stairs, the velvet and smoke of the club blurring around her. A strange, dangerous tension had settled deep in her bones. It was a pull of curiosity, of interest, and of a danger far greater than any she had ever known. In his armored sedan, half an hour later, Nico stared at the rain-slicked streets. "She's lying," he said. "About the debt?" Marco asked from the driver's seat. "About all of it. He's not just holding her in debt. He owns her." Marco navigated a turn, the tires hissing on the wet pavement. "My contacts finished their search. Boss, the intel was good. The police report on Salvatore Moretti's death is thin, officially unsolved, but it was closed 2 days after it was opened. Smells like a payoff." "It's not just that," Marco continued, his voice grim. He picked up a tablet from the passenger seat. "This is what you really need to see. Costa's club isn't just a club, it's a way station. In the last 18 months, at least 4 girls who worked at the Velvet Serpent have disappeared. No forwarding address, no final paycheck. They just vanished. No police reports, no missing persons. They're all young, no local family. He's trafficking them. Nico. The club is his showroom. Nico's jaw tightened. The image of Lena's bruised arm flashed in his mind. I'm clumsy. He was a man who lived by a code. Violence was a tool. Murder was business. But this was filth. This was cancer. And Anton Costa was a parasite feeding on the helpless. Find his supply lines, Nico said, his voice cold and hard. Find his buyers, and find a way to cut them both off at the knees. This ends. The next few nights were quiet. Nico did not return, but the shadow of his presence lingered. Lena felt it in the way Costa watched her. His eyes narrowed, suspicious. He was a dog on a leash that had been yanked, and he was looking for something to bite. He found it 3 nights later. The club was packed. A convention was in town, and the floor was filled with loud, drunk men in cheap suits. Lena was trying to make her way from the stage to the dressing room when she saw the new girl, Mariella, cornered by a large, red-faced customer. Come on, sweetie, the man slurred, grabbing Mariella's thin arm. Just 1 drink. Sit on my lap. No, please, sir, I'll be fired, Mariella pleaded, trying to pull away. The man laughed and yanked her hard, pulling her against his chest. I'll pay your boss. You're coming with me. He began to drag her toward the VIP rooms. Mariella looked at Lena, her eyes a silent, terrified cry for help. Lena knew the rule. No alliances. Look away. But she couldn't. She saw herself in that girl's eyes. Let her go, Lena said, her voice shaking but clear. The man stopped, turning. What did you say to me? You little... She's a waitress, Lena said, stepping forward. She's not on the menu. Let her go. The man's face turned purple. Why, you? He shoved Mariella away and raised his hand to strike Lena. Before his hand could connect, Costa was there, his smile fixed and oily. Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies. A small misunderstanding. He gripped the man's arm. Please, drink in the house for your entire party. In the VIP room. The man grumbled but allowed himself to be led away. Costa took a look at Mariella. Back to the kitchen, now. Mariella fled. Costa's smile vanished. He turned to Lena. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed her by the hair. No, Anton, please, she gasped as he dragged her past the kitchens, down a dark, narrow corridor she had never seen. You like to interfere, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. You like to be a hero? You cost me a VIP client. You broke the rules. He stopped in front of a heavy, metal door, frost outlining its edges. He pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked it. A blast of frigid, chemical air hit her. It was a walk-in cold storage. Anton, no, please, I'm sorry. You need to cool off, Lena. He sneered. Think about your place. He shoved her hard. She stumbled on the slick, grated floor, falling against a stack of hard vegetable crates. She looked back, her eyes wide with terror. Please don't, Costa just smiled. We'll talk in the morning, if you're not too stiff. He slammed the heavy door. The latch clicked. The single bare bulb inside flickered, then went out, plunging her into absolute, freezing blackness. She screamed, pounding on the metal, but the music from the club was a distant, heavy throb. No one could hear her. She was wearing only her thin dressing robe. The cold was immediate, seeping into her skin, into her bones. She huddled in the corner, pulling her knees to her chest, her teeth chattering. The smell of raw meat and damp cardboard filled her lungs. She was going to die here. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the cold. She was numb, her shivers becoming weak and sporadic. She was drifting, her mind cloudy. She thought of her father. She thought of the light on the stage at the conservatory. Then, a noise. A loud bang from outside. Shouting. The lock was scraped. The door was yanked open, flooding the small room with the harsh, bright light of the kitchen. Lena squinted, her frozen limbs refusing to move. A dark silhouette filled the doorway. Mr. Romano, I swear, it was a misunderstanding. It was Costa's voice, high and reedy with panic. She was hysterical. I just had to cool her off. "Get him out of my sight," a low, cold voice commanded. Lena saw Marco grab Costa by the collar and drag him, protesting, out of view. Nico Romano stepped into the cool room. He stopped, his gaze taking in her huddled form, her blue-tinged lips, the raw, red mark on her cheek from where Costa had grabbed her. A rage so cold it was almost silent settled in his eyes. Lena tried to speak, but only a dry, chattering sound came out. She was too weak to stand. He didn't say a word. He simply shrugged off his thick, expensive wool overcoat, the one that smelled of cashmere and the clean night air. He crouched down in front of her, his movements economical and precise. He wrapped the heavy coat around her, his fingers brushing her shoulder. The warmth was a shock, a sudden, piercing pain. Then, with an ease that belied her weight, he scooped her up into his arms. Lena gave a small, broken sound, too weak to protest, and instinctively buried her frozen face against the solid, warm expanse of his chest. He carried her, out of the cold room, through the kitchen, past a terrified-looking staff. He carried her right through the center of the club, now closed and dead in the mid-morning light. He didn't stop until he was outside, in his car. He opened the passenger door and gently, carefully placed her inside. He walked around, got into the driver's seat, and turned the car's heater on to full blast. Lena sat, drowning in the coat, her body beginning to shake violently as the warmth returned. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere safe," he said. He drove her personally, not to a hospital, but to a sleek, anonymous high-rise building downtown. He led her into a private elevator that opened directly into a stunning, minimalist apartment. It was all glass and white marble, with a view that stretched over the entire city. It was clean. It was silent. "You'll stay here," he said, his voice flat. He walked to a closet and opened it. It was filled with women's clothes. Simple, elegant things. Sweaters, pants, dresses, all new. "There's food in the kitchen. The shower is hot," he said, as if noticing she was still shivering. "No one knows about this place. No one can find you here." Lena stood in the middle of the vast living room, clutching his coat around her. She was a ghost in a palace. "And Costa?" she asked, the name tasting like poison. Nico turned to look at her. His dark eyes were impossible to read, but there was a finality in them that chilled her more than the cold room had. "Things are being settled," he said. "You just need to rest. You're safe now." He left, the door closing with a soft, heavy click. Lena stood there for a long time, listening to the silence. Then her knees buckled. She sank to the plush, white rug, still wrapped in his coat, for the first time in 2 years. She let go, sobbing into the dark. Warm wool. The silence of the apartment was louder than the music at the Velvet Serpent. In the club, the noise was a shield, a wall of sound she could hide behind. Here, in this vast, sterile space of white marble and glass, there was nothing to hide behind at all. The silence was absolute, and it was terrifying. Lena struggled with the sudden safety. For the first 2 days, she did not sleep. She only dozed, jerking awake at the sound of the high-end refrigerator humming or the whisper of the ventilation system. She was haunted by the idea that this was just another part of the cage, a more elaborate, gilded one. She kept waiting for the lock to turn, for Anton Costa's voice to echo in the hallway, but he never came. The man who did come was Nico Romano, but he kept his distance. He had given her this space, and he seemed to understand that she was a creature coiled to strike or flee. On the second morning, he introduced her to Sarah. A woman had appeared outside the apartment's private elevator door. She was tall, with a calm, intelligent face and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was dressed in a simple, practical suit. "This is Sarah," Nico had said, his voice neutral. "She will be posted outside the door. She's here for your protection. She's not your jailer. You are free to move around the apartment, but you are not to leave it. Not yet." Lena had only nodded, her eyes down, but she watched Sarah. The woman was not like Costa's thugs. She was professional. her presence a quiet, reassuring hum, not a threat. It was the first time in 2 years Lena had felt guarded, not owned. Nico, meanwhile, was methodically dismantling Anton Costa's life. He did not work from the apartment. He worked from his true office, a fortress of dark wood and steel high in the Romano Syndicate headquarters. He was a general moving piece on a board. "The shipments at the port?" he asked Marco, not looking up from a ledger. "Seized," Marco replied. An anonymous tip to the narcotics division about one container led them to find the other cargo in the remaining 3. Costa lost his entire European import. The feds are holding the ships. His fronts, the nail salon and the check-cashing place on the wharf, both had unfortunate electrical fires last night, Marco said, his face impassive. "Total losses. The insurance company is investigating them for fraud." "And his allies," Nico said, steepling his fingers. "Councilman Davies, suddenly very interested in campaign finance reform," Marco said, a rare, thin smile touching his lips. "He found an audit notice from the IRS on his desk this morning. He will no longer be returning Costa's calls." Nico nodded, satisfied. "Good. Squeeze him. I want him cut off. I want him broke, and I want him desperate. A desperate man makes mistakes." "And the girl? Boss?" Nico's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened slightly. "The girl is not to be touched. She's not to be mentioned. She is separate." Back in the apartment, Lena was slowly, agonizingly thawing. The physical chill of the storage locker had faded, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She spent the first week doing little else but sleeping. Real, deep sleep. She ate the food that Sarah brought her. Simple meals of soup and fresh bread. She took showers so long the glass walls of the bathroom fogged over, washing away the grime and the scent of the club. Nico came by in the evenings. He never stayed long. He would bring dinner, and they would eat at the massive glass dining table. The entire glittering expanse of Port Astoria spread out below them. At first, the silence between them was as vast as the view. Lena was quiet, her gratitude a tangible thing, but she was still terrified of him. He was the devil who had saved her from a lesser demon, but Nico didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand anything. He simply existed. "You're not eating," he said one night, gesturing to her plate. She flinched. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I just meant, is it not good? Sarah can get something else." "No, it's wonderful. I'm just not used to it." He looked at her, his dark eyes analytical. "Is it good food?" "To this," she whispered, gesturing around the room, "to be still." A flicker of something, understanding, perhaps, passed through his gaze. He put his fork down. "What did you like? Before? At the conservatory. What music did you dance to?" The question was so simple, so normal, it almost made her cry. "Chopin? Satie? I loved romantics." "I thought ballet was all Tchaikovsky," he said. A tiny, fragile smile touched her lips. "That's what everyone thinks. But the best dances, the ones that mean something, they're quieter." "Quieter," he repeated, as if tasting the word. They talked about music, about the city, about books. They talked about everything except the velvet serpent, her father, or the men who were, at that very moment, hunting for her. He was building a new world for her, one quiet conversation at a time. And with every night he left without laying a hand on her, without a single inappropriate request. A layer of her fear peeled away. One night, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, she was alone. The apartment was dark, save for the blue-white light of the full moon pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the marble floor in silver. She couldn't sleep. Her body ached, not with injury, but with a restless, dormant energy. Her muscles, so long abused by the cheap choreography of the club, missed the old movements. They missed the discipline. They missed the art. Slowly, hesitantly. She stood in the center of the vast living room, bathed in moonlight. She raised her arms into a simple first position. Her body trembled. It felt foreign, like a language she had forgotten. She closed her eyes and took a breath. She moved into a plie, her knees bending, her back straight. It was stiff, and it was weak, but it was hers. She moved through the positions, one after the other, her body slowly, painfully remembering. There was no music but the sound of her own breathing, the soft brush of her bare feet on the cold stone. She was not performing. She was not a prisoner. She was, for the first time in years, simply dancing. The movements grew, a tendu, an arabesque, her leg extended behind her, her arms reaching for the moon. The dance was not for an audience. It was a prayer. It was an exorcism. She was pushing the filth and the fear out of her muscles, reclaiming her own skin. She didn't hear the soft, hydraulic sigh of the private elevator. She didn't hear the soft footfall in the hallway. Nico had come to drop off a file for Sarah. He entered the apartment's foyer and stopped, frozen. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching. He had seen her dance in the club, a beautiful, broken thing moving through the smoke. This was not that. This was life. He watched her move, her face tight with concentration and a strange, pure joy. He saw the strength in her lines, the grace that Costa had tried to beat out of her. He saw the woman she was supposed to be, a man of iron control, a man who hadn't felt an unprocessed emotion in a decade. Nico felt something sharp and hot clench in his chest. It was a profound, aching admiration. She finished her movements, her body arching in a final, graceful pose, her chest heaving, sweat glistening on her forehead. She stood there, trembling, alive, beautiful. The word was a low rumble in the darkness. Lena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she spun around. "Nico, I didn't know you were here. I was just—" He stepped out of the shadow, into the moonlight. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark, intense, and fixed on her. He didn't speak. He just walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate. She stood frozen like a deer, her heart hammering. He stopped an inch from her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his suit. He raised his hand, his fingers slightly rough, and with a tenderness that shattered her, he brushed a stray, damp strand of hair from her cheek. "You've been hiding that?" he whispered. "I'm not that person anymore," she choked out. "Yes, you are," he said, his voice raw. His hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. It was the kind of touch she had dreamed of, gentle, respectful, warm. Her entire body trembled, and in a moment of instinct, of pure, starving need, she leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her forehead resting against the solid wall of his chest. She felt his other arm come around her waist, pulling her closer, not in a sexual way, but in a protective one. She could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart under her ear. He smelled of wool and clean air, and something uniquely him, safety. "You deserve better than this world, Lena," he whispered into her hair. "Better than me, better than all of it." That was what broke her. Not the violence, not the fear, kindness. She cried, for the first time. She did not hide it. She sobbed, her hands gripping the lapels of his expensive suit, burying her face against his chest. She cried for her father, for her lost dreams, for the years of filth and fear, and for this strange, dangerous man who was showing her a kindness she thought was dead. Nico just held her. He held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair, anchoring her as the storm of her grief finally broke. When the sobs quieted, she was still trembling, her body exhausted. She looked up, her face tear-stained, her eyes meeting his. They were so close. His gaze was no longer analytical. It was dark with an emotion she couldn't name, and it was focused entirely on her lips. He leaned in. She saw it coming. Her own lips parted. She wanted it. She wanted this one, clean thing. But as his mouth was a breath from hers, the images flashed. Costa's face, the leering drunks, the cold, dark storage room. She flinched and pulled back, just an inch, her hands pushing weakly at his chest. "I can't," she whispered, the words torn from her. "I'm sorry. I'm not whole. I'm broken. I'm just pieces. There's nothing clean left." Nico stopped instantly. He didn't push. He didn't try to convince her. He just looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw the self-hatred, the shame. "Then let me help you find the pieces," he said, his voice a low, fierce promise. Before she could answer, his phone vibrated in his pocket, a harsh, buzzing sound that shattered the intimacy. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He let out a short, sharp breath and released her. Stepping back, the spell was broken. He pulled out his phone, glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by the cold, sharp-edged boss. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat. "Nico?" she started. "Lock the door," he said, and then he was gone. The elevator doors sliding shut, leaving her alone in the moonlight. The next day, the atmosphere in the apartment was different. Sarah was still outside, but now there was another man with her. The air crackled with a new, sharper tension. Lena knew something was wrong. She didn't know that Anton Costa, cornered and financially ruined, had finally discovered where she was. He didn't know the exact apartment, but he knew the building. He knew Nico had stashed her. And in a final, desperate act, he had put a bounty on her head, telling his few remaining allies that she was Nico's new, secret weakness. He pressured them, called in old favors, demanding they push back on the Romano syndicate. That night, Nico's convoy was leaving a late meeting in the warehouse district. His armored sedan was flanked by a follow car, with Marco at the wheel. It happened fast. A sanitation truck pulled out of an alley, blocking the street. A black sedan screeched up behind them, boxing them in. The night exploded. The sound of automatic gunfire ripped through the air, a deafening percussive rain. Sparks flew as bullets impacted the armored glass of Nico's car, inches from his head. Nico didn't even flinch. "Marco," he said into his intercom, his voice lethally calm. 3 o'clock. "I see him, boss." Marco's window lowered. He returned fire, not in a panicked spray, but with methodical, double-tapped shots. The sedan's windshield spiderwebbed. The backup car containing Nico's men rammed the sanitation truck, pushing it just enough to create a gap. "Go," Nico commanded. Marco slammed the car into reverse, spun the wheel, and accelerated through the gap. Bullets pinging off the trunk. They sped through the alleyways, emerging blocks away, the sound of gunfire fading. Nico was untouched. He looked down. Marco was bleeding, a dark stain spreading rapidly from a wound in his left arm. "It's just a graze," Marco grunted. Nico's face was carved from granite. This was no longer business. Costa had tried to kill him. He had crossed the line. "Take me to the office," Nico said, his voice quiet, which was the most dangerous sound in the world. "And get the doctor. Then I want every man we have. We're not squeezing Costa anymore. We're erasing him." Lena heard about it on the news. She was watching the small television in the kitchen when a breaking report came on. A suspected gang-related shooting in the warehouse district. The footage showed the street, littered with shell casings. They mentioned the Romano syndicate. Her blood ran cold. When Nico didn't come that night, she knew it was her. She was the cause. She was the weakness Costa was exploiting. This man, this powerful, dangerous, kind man, was going to die, and it would be her fault. The old, cold survival instinct returned. Run. She was a poison. She was a liability. She had to disappear, for his sake. She found a small duffel bag in the back of the pristine closet. She packed nothing. A pair of jeans, a sweater. She dug her old, battered ballet shoes from the bottom of her robe pocket. The ones she had worn from the club. They were the only thing that was truly hers. She waited until she heard Sarah talking to the other guard. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She walked to the private elevator, her hand shaking. She pressed the button. The doors slid open. Nico was standing inside. He was exhausted. There was a small cut on his temple, and his suit was rumpled. He looked at her. He looked at the duffel bag in her hand, and his face, already hard, became impossibly cold. "Where are you going, Lena?" She shrank back, her breath catching. "I saw the news. The shooting." "I'm fine," he said, stepping out of the elevator, blocking her path. "No," she said, tears welling in her eyes, hot and fast. "You're not. This is because of me. Costa. He's doing this because of me. I won't be the reason you get killed." She tried to push past him. "Please, just let me go. I can disappear. I'm good at it. You have to let me go. You can't throw away everything you've built your whole life for me. I'm not worth it." She was begging him, the words tumbling out, her voice breaking. Nico looked at her, at this terrified, brave, broken woman, willing to sacrifice herself to save him. He looked at the bag. He looked at her desperate, tear-streaked face. He took the bag from her hand and dropped it to the marble floor. Then he grabbed her. It was not the gentle touch from the night before. It was a desperate, possessive, claiming hold. His arms wrapped around her, one hand tangling in her hair, holding her head, the other crushing her to his body, as if he could absorb her, as if he could protect her from the world by sheer force of will. He buried his face in the side of her neck, breathing her in. She could feel the tremor in his arms. He was not cold. He was terrified. Terrified of losing her. "I already have," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing against her skin. "And I'm not sorry." His words hung in the silence of the marble foyer, a confession that was also a condemnation. "I already have, and I'm not sorry." Lena stared at him, her tears suspended. He was still holding her, his grip a desperate anchor. The man who had been a shadow, a force of nature, a cold and calculating power, was looking at her with an undisguised, raw terror of his own. He was afraid of losing her, the broken, worthless girl from the club. The realization short-circuited every instinct to flee. She had come to this elevator to save him from herself, but he was holding her as if she were the only thing saving him. "Nico," she whispered, the name a fragile, untried thing on her tongue. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his dark eyes tracing the paths of her tears. The cut on his temple was a stark, angry red against his pale skin. He was a man made of violence and control, and in that moment, he was offering her all his vulnerability. The romantic tension that had been simmering for weeks, in quiet meals, in shared glances, in the moonlight dance, peaked. It became an unbearable, crushing pressure, a need to bridge the final, terrifying gap between them. Lena's hands, which had been pressed against his chest in a plea, slowly changed. Her fingers uncurled. They were shaking. Not from cold, not anymore, but from a profound, terrifying desire. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted one hand. She saw the grime from her old life still faintly etched in her cuticles and flinched, but he didn't pull away. She touched his face. Her trembling fingertips grazed the rough stubble on his jaw, then the sharp, bruised line of his cheekbone. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as if he, too, were starved. This was her choice, not a debt, not a command, not a desperate act of survival. It was the first real choice she had made in 2 years. She rose on her toes, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She was clumsy, uncertain, her body rigid with the memory of unwanted touch, but her will was clear. As Lena kissed Nico, it was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of profound, heartbreaking tenderness. It was slow. I was hesitant. It was the taste of salt from her tears and the metallic tang of blood from the cut on his temple. It was too broken, jagged pieces finding a place to rest. His hands, which had been gripping her with bruising force, gentled. One hand moved from her back to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her to him as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He didn't take it. He only received, and when she finally, slowly, pulled back, they just rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air. That night, she couldn't go to the guest room, and he wouldn't let her. He didn't ask. He simply took her hand and led her to his own bedroom, a vast space of dark woods and gray linens, the city lights a silent, glittering carpet far below. They slept. That was all. He shed his suit jacket and his tie, but nothing else. She was still in the sweater and jeans she had planned to escape in. He lay on his back on top of the covers, and she lay beside him, her head on his chest, her ear over the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. He wrapped one arm around her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a silent promise of protection. It was the first night in more than 700 that Lena Moretti had slept without fear. They were just two survivors, holding on in the dark. A few nights later, the dynamic shifted. The tentative peace they had found was replaced by a new, unpleasant tension. They had crossed a line, and neither knew what to do on the other side. Lena was stronger. The food, the sleep, the absence of terror, it had brought color back to her face, but it had also brought back her spirit, and with it a deep, restless yearning. She watched him. He was back to being the boss. He spent hours on the phone, his voice a low, cold monotone, his words clipped and final. He was moving against Costa, and he was moving hard. He was building his fortress, and he was polite to her, kind but distant. The man who had held her with such desperation was gone, replaced by the mafia boss. She understood. He was afraid of what it meant. So was she. But she was also afraid of what it meant if they didn't face it. She was tired of being a ghost. That night, he was standing by the great glass window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring down at the city. He was coiled, the stress of his war with Costa rolling off him in waves. Lena came up behind him. She didn't touch him, not at first. "You're going to burn a hole in the glass staring like that," she said, her voice soft. He turned, surprised. A small, tired smile touched his lips. "It's a long way down. Nico," she stepped closer, into his personal space. She saw his throat move as he swallowed. "Lena," he said, his voice a warning. Don't what?" she asked, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "Don't be near you. Don't feel this. For 2 years, every single part of my life was a command. I was told when to dance, when to smile, when to be silent. I was a thing, a prisoner." She reached out and, with a courage that amazed her, took the glass from his hand and set it on a nearby table. Then she took his hand. His fingers were stiff, resistant. "I'm not a prisoner anymore. Nico," she whispered, looking up at him, her eyes searching for him. "And I don't want to feel like one. I don't want to be afraid. Not of you. Not of this." She lifted his hand and pressed his palm flat against her chest, over her heart. It was beating a frantic, wild rhythm. "I want to feel like a woman again. With you." His resolve broke. A low sound, almost a groan, escaped him. "Lena, I'm not good." "You're good to me," she said, her voice fierce. She initiated it. She went up on her toes and kissed him again. And this time, there was no hesitation. This time, there was fire. He responded instantly, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger he had clearly been suppressing. It was a desperate, searching kiss, a release of all the tension, the fear, the violence of the past weeks. He broke away, breathless, resting his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice rough. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed. The scene that followed was not one of wild passion, but of deep, emotional discovery. It was hesitant and it was eager. He led her to the bedroom, but every step was a question, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. He was a man who took what he wanted, but with her, he only asked. He undressed her slowly, his touch a reverence. His lingering gaze was not the leering consumption she had known, but a look of genuine awe. He was unwrapping a priceless gift. When his fingers brushed the faint, yellowing bruises on her arms, his hands, calloused and strong, trembled. "He will pay for every mark he left on you," he whispered, his voice thick with a promise that was more violent than any threat. "He already has," she replied, her voice shaking, "by letting me find you." She, in turn, explored him. Her trembling fingertips traced the lines of his chest, the hard muscles of his shoulders, the small, puckered scar on his side, a map of the dangerous life he lived. She ran her fingers through his dark, thick hair, a simple, intimate act that made his eyes close in pleasure. He was impossibly gentle. He laid her on the cool, high-count sheets and simply looked at her, his expression a mixture of desire and a profound, aching tenderness. He kissed her. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, her jaw. He moved lower, his lips brushing the delicate, hollow curve of her collarbone. The touch was electric, a whisper of sensation that made her arch her back, a soft sound escaping her. It was a touch that asked for nothing, but gave everything. It was slow. It was reassurance whispered in the dark. It was two damaged souls finding a way to be whole, just for a few hours, in each other's arms. The next morning, the sun streamed into the room, bright and unforgiving. Lena woke up first. She was wrapped in his arms, her leg tangled with his. The intimacy of it, the sheer profound safety, was overwhelming. She felt him stir. His arm tightened around her possessively before he was fully awake, and then the fear returned. For both of them. He opened his eyes and saw her watching him. The tenderness of the night before was gone, replaced by the stark, terrified realization of what they had done. He had let her in. He had revealed his one true weakness, and she had given the last, unbroken part of herself to the most dangerous man in Port Astoria. Nico sat up, pulling away from her, the sheet pooling at his waist. He didn't look at her. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "I have a meeting," he said, his voice flat, cold. Lena felt the chill as if he'd opened a window. She pulled the sheet up to her chin, her new, fragile confidence shattering. "Nico, get dressed," he said, not unkindly, but the command was clear. The boss was back. "Sarah will bring you breakfast." He stood and walked to the bathroom without a backward glance, leaving her alone in the massive bed, the scent of him on her skin, the cold emptiness of the morning air settling around her. They both acted as if nothing had happened, because to acknowledge it was too dangerous for either of them. Nico's meeting was not just a meeting, it was a summit. He sat at the head of a long, dark mahogany table in a secure, private room. Surrounding him were the heads of the 4 other major families that ran Port Astoria. These were old men, with old-world values. They respected strength, but they hated instability. Nico. One of them, Don Falcone, said, his voice like gravel. "You call this meeting. You disrupt our business. This war you are having with this Costa. It is bad for all of us. He is an ally. He pays his tribute." Nico was calm. He was in his element. He was an ally. He is now a liability. He gestured to Marco, who stood by the door. Marco began to pass out thin, black folders. "Costa broke the rules," Nico said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He stopped moving cargo and started moving people." The men opened the folders. Inside were surveillance photos, shipping manifests, bank records, and, most damning, photographs of the girls, pale and terrified, being loaded into unmarked vans. "Human trafficking," Nico said, the words dropping like stones into the silence. "He's bringing in slaves. He's drawing a kind of federal attention that none of us can afford. He's not just a rat. He is a diseased rat." A murmur went around the table. This was not business. This was a violation. "And," Nico added, his voice turning to ice, "he tried to hit a boss. He tried to hit me, on my own street." The silence was absolute. That, more than anything, was a declaration of war that could not be ignored. Nico stood up. "I am not asking your permission. I am informing you. The Romano Syndicate is formally severing all ties with Anton Costa and his organization. I am cutting the cancer out. Any family who continues to do business with him will be considered contaminated. You have 24 hours to choose." He walked out of the room, leaving the old men to stare at the sickening proof in their hands. He had taken a massive risk, drawing a line in the sand, but he had done it. That evening, he took Lena somewhere new. He drove her to a different building, a quiet, older one he owned downtown. He led her up to the 3rd floor. He unlocked a door, and she gasped. It was a dance studio. It was beautiful. A wall of mirrors, polished hardwood floors, a long wooden bear. It was clean and bright, and it smelled of rosin and lemon oil. "Is it yours?" she whispered. "It is now," he said, leaning against the door frame. "My mother used to dance. Before..." Lena stepped into the center of the room. She could feel the potential under her feet. She walked to the bar, her hand resting on the wood. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "It's been so long. I'm weak. "You're the strongest person I have ever met," he said, his voice soft. He left her there, for hours, and she began. It was agony. Her muscles screamed, her balance was gone, she fell out of a simple pirouette. But her body remembered. The movements she thought were gone, beaten and starved out of her, were still there, buried deep. For the next week, it was her sanctuary. While Nico waged his war in the streets, she waged hers at the bar. She rebuilt herself, one painful plie at a time. One evening, Nico came to watch. She was nervous, but she didn't stop. She put on the Chopin music she had told him about, and she danced. This was not the sorrowful, empty performance from the club. This was not the desperate, moonlit dance in his apartment. This was power. It was grace, strength, and fire. She was reclaiming her art, her body, her soul. She finished, her body slick with sweat, her chest heaving, her chin high. Nico was standing in the doorway, his face undone. He was watching her with an awe that stole her breath. He walked toward her, not touching her, just drinking her in. "You're free," he whispered. The moment was perfect. It was so perfect, it had to break. Marco burst through the door, his face pale, his phone in his hand. "Boss, I'm sorry, it's Costa." Nico's face hardened, the tenderness vanishing. "What?" "He's desperate. The family's cut him off. He's got nothing left. He did something. He snatched a girl, one of the waitresses from the club, to draw you out, to draw her out." Lena's heart stopped. "Who?" Marco looked at Nico, then at Lena, his expression grim. "Her name is Mariella." Lena's blood ran cold. Mariella. The young girl she had protected. The girl who had been the cause of her punishment in the cold room. This was her fault. "No," Lena said, stepping forward. "He can't. Where is she?" "We don't know yet, but," Marco started. "Find her," Nico commanded, his voice a low growl of pure fury. "We have to help her," Lena said, grabbing Nico's arm. "No," Nico said, turning to her, his face a mask of iron. "You are not going anywhere. This is exactly what he wants. He wants you. I don't care," Lena shouted, her new strength turning to defiant rage. "That girl is in a cage because of me. I protected her once, and Costa is using her to punish me. I am not that weak little girl he can lock in a freezer anymore. I am going—" "You are not!" Nico roared, his control finally snapping. He grabbed her shoulders. "Do you understand? I am doing this to protect you. You will stay here, where you are safe." "And what?" she cried, shoving at his chest. "I hide in a tower while a girl, an innocent girl, is hurt. That's not safe. That's just a different cage. I thought you said I was free." The words hit him like a slap. He stared at her, his anger warring with the fierce pride in his eyes. She was magnificent, and she was right. He let go of her, taking a deep, steadying breath. He was a strategist. He needed to control the board. "Fine," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You will help. You know her. You know what she's thinking. But on one condition." "Anything," she said. "We are going to find her. My men are going to get her. You will stay with me at the command center. You will be nowhere near the building. You will be safe, behind walls of steel. You do not leave my side. That is the only way." Lena looked at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the non-negotiable line. He was giving her a way to be involved, but he was still caging her, just in a different way. She nodded, her expression hardening. "I agree." He looked at her, searching her face, trying to see if she was lying. She met his gaze evenly. He turned to Marco. "Find her. I wanted her location an hour ago." As the men rushed out, Lena looked at her reflection in the great mirror. She reluctantly agreed, but her eyes said something else entirely. Her eyes said she might not. The penthouse office was a high-tech fortress, a stark contrast to the opulence of Nico's personal study. It was a room of cold glass and black steel, dominated by a massive digital display showing blueprints. "Here," Nico said, his voice clipped. He pointed to a red highlighted area on the screen. "Costa's holed up in the sub-basement warehouse of the Velvet Serpent. He thinks it's a stronghold. It's a tomb." Marco and a half dozen of Nico's most trusted men, all dressed in dark, practical tactical gear, were gathered around. "He's using the old bootlegger tunnels for access," Marco reported, pointing to a schematic. "But the main freight access is here. It's reinforced steel. We'll have to breach it, hard and fast. He'll have at least 10, maybe 12 men," Nico continued, his face like stone. "He's desperate, which makes him stupid, but he's still armed. We go in 2 teams. Alpha team with me, through the main breach. Bravo team, Marco. You take the service corridor and cut off his escape route. We clear the rooms, we secure the girl, and we end this." No one. He looked around the room, his gaze lethal. "Touches Costa, but me." Lena stood in the corner, her arms wrapped around her middle. She was a ghost in the war room, her dancer's frame lost in the presence of these hard, focused men. She watched the blueprints, her mind racing, the service corridor, the backstage hallways. She knew those. "Lena," Nico said, turning to her. The entire room went silent. The men looked away, giving them a semblance of privacy. He walked to her, his face softening only a fraction. "You will stay here, in this room. Sarah and 2 of my men will be right outside the door. You will not leave. You will be safe." She looked at the blueprints, then at him. "And Mariella?" "I will bring her back," he said. It was an iron promise. Lena nodded, her expression unreadable. "Be careful, Nico." He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to lock her in his arms, but in front of his men, he just gave a short, sharp nod. "Lock the doors after we leave." He turned. "Alpha team, with me. Move out." The men filed out, a quiet, deadly procession. The heavy office door clicked shut. Lena was left alone with the glowing blueprints, the silence of the room suffocating. She waited. She listened to the hum of the servers. She looked at the red-lit map of the club, of her prison. She thought of Mariella, in the dark. She thought of the icy, chemical smell of the cold storage room. She thought of Costa's hand in her hair, his sneering voice. "You think you're a hero?" Nico was planning a war. He was going to breach a steel door. But Lena knew a back door. Sarah stood outside, a silent guardian. Lena walked to the private bathroom connected to the office. She closed the door, her heart hammering. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair was pulled back in a simple knot. She reached up and pulled out the long, sharp, steel-tipped pin that held it in place. She palmed it. She didn't exit back into the office. There was another door, a small, discreet panel for housekeeping that led to a narrow service hall. It was a feature of the building she had discovered during her restless pacing. It was not meant for her, but it was not locked. She slipped into the hallway, a shadow in her dark clothes. She bypassed Sierra and the guards, moving with a dancer's silent grace. She made it to the service elevator, her hand gripping the metal hairpin so tightly it bit into her palm. She was not that weak little girl he could lock in a freezer. She was going. The alley behind the Velvet Serpent was dark, with the smell of garbage and stale beer. Lena slipped from the shadows, staying close to the brick wall. Nico's teams were not here yet. They would be staging, preparing for their breach on the warehouse's main freight entrance. A block over. Lena knew this entrance. It was a rusted metal grate set into the foundation, half hidden by a mountain of overflowing dumpsters. It led to the old ventilation system, which connected to the backstage hallways. The grate was heavy, but she put her feet against the wall and pulled, her muscles, strengthened by a week at the bar. Straining, it groaned, then gave way, opening a black, square maw. She slipped inside, into the darkness. She moved by touch, her hand on the cold, damp concrete wall. She knew this place. She had felt its proximity for 2 years. After a minute, her eyes adjusted to the near-total blackness. She reached a junction and turned left, moving toward the faint, acrid smell of the basement kitchens. She could hear them, men's voices, rough and agitated, echoing from the main warehouse space below. She stayed in the hallways she knew, a ghost in her own nightmare. She passed the grimy dressing room, her old cage. She kept going, deeper, down a flight of stairs. She'd only been dragged down once. The cold hit her first. The unmistakable, chemical chill of the cold storage. The door was just ahead. She heard a sound from inside, a whimper. Mariella, the door wasn't locked, it was barred, a heavy 2x4 dropped into steel brackets. Lena's hands shook. She lifted the heavy wooden plank, her muscles screaming at the weight. It clattered to the floor. She yanked the heavy, insulated door open. Mariella was huddled in the corner, just as Lena had been. She was weeping, her thin body shaking, her lips blue. "Mariella," Lena whispered. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. "Lena, am I dead?" "No, but we're leaving. Now," Lena said, pulling the girl to her feet. Mariella was weak, her legs buckling. "You have to walk. You have to be quiet." She wrapped her arm around the girl's waist, practically carrying her. She pulled her out into the dark corridor. "This way. The way I came in. I don't know who to trust." A new voice, harsh and amused, echoed in the hallway. Lena froze. A light clicked on, blinding her. Two of Costa's men stood at the end of the hall, blocking the stairs. "You should trust us. Little bird," one of them sneered. "The boss has been waiting for you." Lena shoved Mariella behind her, her hand tightening on the hairpin, a useless, tiny weapon against two armed men. It was over. "Grab them," the man ordered. At that exact moment, a sound like the world splitting in two rocked the building. A deep, metallic boom that vibrated through the concrete. It was followed by shouting and the distinct, rapid pop, pop, pop of gunfire. Nico was here. The men who had cornered Lena cursed. One grabbed her arm, the other grabbed Mariella. "He's in the main room. Get them to Costa. Move." Lena was dragged, stumbling, toward the sound of the fight. They burst through a set of double doors into a vast, concrete warehouse. Smoke hung in the air, tasting of cordite. Men were shouting, firing from behind crates and steel shelves. She saw them. Nico, Marco. They were moving like professionals, a dark, efficient storm. Then she saw Costa. He was at the far end of the room, near a loading dock, his face a mask of sweat and terror, firing a pistol wildly. "Get back! Get back!" "Boss, look, we got her," the man yelled, dragging Lena forward. Costa's head snapped around. His eyes widened, a new, manic light dawning in them. He saw Lena, and he saw Nico, who had frozen, his position exposed, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. "Lena!" Nico roared. Costa lunged. He shoved his man aside and grabbed Lena, yanking her back against his chest, his arm locking around her throat. He pressed the hot, smoking barrel of his pistol to her temple. "Stop!" Costa screamed, his voice cracking. "Everyone stop, or she dies!" The gunfire sputtered and died. The room was suddenly, shockingly silent, broken only by the sound of a man groaning in the shadows. Nico stood in the open, his weapon at his side, his chest heaving. His eyes were locked on Lena. One of Costa's men, his second in command, tried to take advantage of the lull. He raised his rifle from behind a forklift, aiming at Nico. "Nico!" Lena screamed. A shot rang out from near the door. One of Nico's men, a man Lena knew as Vinny, cried out and slumped to the ground, a dark stain spreading on his chest. Nico didn't hesitate. He was a creature of pure, cold instinct. He raised his pistol and fired twice. The man who had shot Vinny dropped, his rifle clattering. "I said stop!" Costa shrieked, pressing the gun harder into Lena's skin, dragging her back. "Now it's just you and me, Romano, and your little whore!" Nico's face was white. He was breathing hard, his control stretched to its absolute limit. "All this," Costa spat, laughing, a high, unhinged sound. "All this, my entire operation, my allies, my money, you burned it all. For her? For a dancer? You're soft, Romano. You're weak. Your father would be ashamed of you. You've ruined everything for this." "Let her go, Costa," Nico said, his voice dangerously low. "It's me you want." "I know," Costa giggled, "and I'm going to take her from you, right before I kill you. Drop your gun, Nico. Kick it away. Or I'll blow her pretty, empty head all over this floor. Do it, now!" Nico looked at Lena. He saw her terror, but he also saw the flicker of defiance, the same fire he'd seen in the studio. Her eyes met his. "I'm sorry," they said slowly, deliberately. Nico lowered his weapon. He uncurled his fingers. The heavy black pistol clattered to the concrete floor. He kicked it away. He was defenseless. Costa smiled, a wide, grotesque splitting of his face. He was triumphant. See, little bird? In the end, they all gah. He hadn't seen her other hand, the one she had kept clenched by her side. Lena drove the steel hairpin, her last tiny piece of agency, with all her strength, down into the soft flesh of his shoulder, just below the collarbone. Costa screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure agony and surprise. His arm spasmed, his grip on her throat loosened, his gun hand wavering for a single, critical second as he recoiled. It was all Nico needed. In one fluid, lightning-fast motion, Nico dropped, his hand going to his ankle. He rose, a smaller, silver pistol appearing in his hand, a single shot. It was impossibly loud in the concrete room. Anton Costa's eyes went wide. His smile was still on his face. Frozen in surprise, a small, dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. He looked down, confused. He looked at Lena. Then he fell, his grip on her finally, blessedly gone. Lena collapsed. Her legs turned to water, her body giving out. She hit the concrete, her breath coming in great, tearing sobs. The silence lasted for 1 second. "Marco!" Nico roared, the name a raw wound. He was at Lena's side in an instant, dropping to his knees, pulling her into his arms, his hands checking her for wounds. "Marco, get the girl! Get Mariella!" Marco, who had been providing cover, rushed forward, his face grim. He grabbed the terrified, weeping Mariella. "This way! You're safe!" He half carried her toward the main breach. "Vinny's hit! Vinny's hit!" one of the men yelled. "We need to go! Sirens! I hear sirens!" The distant wail of police cars was growing, a wolf cry in the night. "We're out!" "Now!" Nico commanded. He scooped Lena up, her face buried in his chest, her body shaking so violently he could barely hold her. He carried her, running through the smoke-filled warehouse, past the body of Anton Costa, past his wounded man. They burst out into the night, piling into the black, armored sedans. Nico didn't let her go. He held her in the back of the car as it sped away, tires squealing, leaving the chaos and the flashing lights behind. He looked back. He saw 2 of his men carrying Vinny, who was alive, but bleeding badly. The cost was high. They made it back to the penthouse. The ride was silent, broken only by the shuddering, silent sobs Lena was trying to control. Nico carried her inside. Sarah was at the door, her face pale, but Nico brushed past her. He carried Lena through the pristine apartment, past the beautiful, quiet studio, and into the dark safety of his bedroom. He sat her gently on the edge of the bed. She was rigid, her body locked in a rictus of shock, staring at her own hands. He crouched in front of her, taking her cold, trembling fingers in his. "Lena," he said, his voice raw, "look at me. It's over. He's gone. You're safe." His words were the key, the lock that had held her together for 2 years finally, and completely shattered. She looked at him, and she broke. It was not the quiet, grieving tears she had shed before. It was a violent, primal storm, a terrifying, guttural wail of 2 years of terror, and filth, and self-hatred, and rage, erupting from her. She pounded her fists against his chest, her sobs so deep they had no sound. Nico didn't flinch, he just took it. He sat on the bed, pulled her into his lap, and wrapped his arms around her, holding her body tightly as the hurricane of her trauma finally broke free. He held her as if he were the only thing keeping her from flying into a million pieces. He didn't say, "You're okay?" He didn't say, "It's all right." He just held her. He held her silently for hours, his hand stroking her hair, his own face buried in her neck. He held her as the sky outside began to pale, and he held her as the last of the violent shudders subsided into exhausted, broken whimpers. And finally, when the sun was just beginning to touch the skyline, he held her as she went limp, her body a dead, heavy weight, fast asleep in his arms. The smoke from the fire at the Velvet Serpent had long since cleared. In the weeks that followed the warehouse raid, Anton Costa's entire organization crumbled, not like a building, but like a handful of ash tossed into the wind. With its leader gone and its illicit operations exposed to the other families by Nico, the network simply dissolved. The club itself was boarded up, a dark, silent monument to the horrors that had lived within its walls. Port Astoria's underbelly was healing. Nico's syndicate, with its silent, brutal efficiency, had absorbed the territory. But the trafficking, the element that had drawn Nico's fire, was eradicated. It was a cleansing. Mariella was safe. Vinny, the man wounded in the raid, had recovered. The other survivors, the girls who had been trapped in Costa's orbit, were quietly located. They were given money, a lot of money and new identities, funneled through legal charities that Nico funded anonymously. They were ghosts, given a second chance at life, scattered to new cities where they could be whole again. Lena was healing, too. The penthouse, once a sterile, gilded cage, had become a home. She had moved in with Nico, a transition so natural neither of them had ever discussed it. The nightmares still came. She would sometimes wake in the dark, her heart pounding, the phantom smell of stale whiskey and cold, chemical air in her lungs. But she no longer woke up alone. She would wake to Nico's steady breathing beside her, his hand finding hers in the dark, his presence a solid, warm anchor that chased the shadows away. She was feeling more like herself than she had in years. The hollow-eyed, detached dancer was gone, replaced by a woman whose spirit, though scarred, was bright. She spent her days in the dance studio, the one he had given her. It was her sanctuary, the place where she sweated out the last of the poison, rebuilding her body, one painful tendu at a time. Her strength returned, followed by her grace. One afternoon, Nico found her studying a flyer. The Port Astoria Ballet, the city's premier company, was holding open auditions for their winter corps. "You should go," he said, his voice quiet from the doorway. She looked up, her face a mixture of fear and longing. "Nico, I'm 23. I haven't been in a real class in so long. They want girls who are 18, straight from the conservatory." "You are better than all of them," he said. It was not a compliment, it was a statement of fact. She walked into the vast, sunlit studio, her old ballet shoes in her bag. She was terrified. The other dancers were young, sharp, and looked at her with polite, dismissive curiosity. But when the music started, Lena closed her eyes. She was not in an audition. She was not in the club. She was in the moonlight, in Nico's apartment. She was at the gala, free. She danced with a raw, emotional power that the technically perfect younger girls could not touch. She danced to her story. The ballet master, a severe man with sharp eyes, did not speak. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. She left, convinced she had failed. She didn't know that the company, which had been struggling, had received a massive anonymous donation just 2 weeks prior, a donation that had opened up 10 new positions, with a specific request to fund talent that had been overlooked. A week passed, a week of nervous, churning anxiety. Finally, one morning, she couldn't wait any longer. She walked to the company's downtown studio, her stomach in knots. The list was posted on the main door. Behind glass, the winter corps list. She scanned it, her heart pounding. Her eyes moved past the names, searching, not truly expecting. And then she saw it at the bottom of the list, in crisp, black type. Lena Moretti. She stared at the letters, her hand rising to cover her mouth. Her name, her real name. The name she thought had died with her father. It was not a number. It was not a little bird. It was not a gift. It was Lena Moretti, dancer. She did not just cry. She broke down, right there on the busy downtown sidewalk. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the door and sobbed, her shoulders shaking with a joy so profound, so pure. It was almost painful. It was a baptism, washing away the last, clinging remnants of the velvet serpent. That night, she was scheduled to perform. It was her first true performance since her return. It was a private gala, a fundraiser for a new charity dedicated to helping victims of human trafficking and domestic abuse. The charity, of course, was one Nico had established, his name nowhere on the paperwork. The theater was small, elegant, and filled with the city's elite. They were here to donate and to be seen. But when Lena stepped onto the stage, a hush fell. She was in a simple, flowing white dress, The music was Chopin. The piece was her own. Nico watched from the shadows. He stood at the very back of the auditorium, in a dark alcove, a shadow in his perfect black suit. He hated these people. He hated these events. But he would not have been anywhere else in the world. He watched her dance. He saw every ounce of her pain, her suffering, her strength, and her final, blazing triumph poured into the movements. She was not just a dancer. She was a force of nature. She was graceful. She was his. A profound, unfamiliar emotion tightened his chest. It was pride. Yes, but it was more. It was awesome. This cold, calculating man, this boss of the Romano syndicate, who had not shed a tear when his own father died, felt a burning sting behind his eyes. He was impossibly almost emotional. He watched the woman he had pulled from the darkness, and he realized, in that moment, that she had been the one to pull him into the light. The music swelled, and Lena hit her final pose, her chin high, her arms raised, her face a mask of radiant, triumphant joy. The applause was instantaneous. It was not the polite clapping of a stuffy gala. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. People were on their feet, moved, their faces stunned. Lena bowed, the tears streaming down her face, and then she ran. She ran off the stage, past the curtain, into the dim backstage area. He was there. He was waiting for her, just out of sight of the stagehands. "Nico," she cried, her voice breathless. She launched herself at him. She didn't just hug him. She ran and jumped, and he caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist like steel, lifting her from the floor. She wrapped her legs around him, her arms locked around his neck, burying her face against his. She was sobbing, laughing, all at once. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, the sweat and the perfume and the victory. He held her, the only truly good thing he had ever possessed. He let her slide down, her feet touching the floor, but he didn't let her go. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her joyful tears. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice rough. "I did it," she whispered, her hands clinging to his suit jacket. "I really did it." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit his dark eyes. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You'll only dance for joy now," he whispered. It was a promise. It was the vow he had made to himself the first night he saw her. They returned to the penthouse. The high of the performance, the adrenaline of the applause, slowly faded, replaced by a deep, quiet intimacy. The apartment was dark, the city lights glittering below like a fallen constellation. Nico was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tie loosened, his jacket off. He was watching the city, but his thoughts were miles away. Lena came up behind him. She was in a simple silk robe, her hair damp from the shower. She didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against the strong, warm expanse of his back. She felt his muscles tense, then relax, his hand coming up to cover hers where they rested on his chest. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing. Finally, she let go. He turned to face her. His eyes were dark, still full of the emotion from the gala. This time, she initiated. She stepped into his space, her hands rising, not in fear, not in supplication, but with a slow, confident ownership. Her fingers, the long, graceful fingers of a dancer, slowly, deliberately, traced the hard line of his chest through the fine cotton of his shirt. She felt the heavy, steady beat of his heart under her palm. "Thank you, Nico," she whispered, "for seeing me." "I always saw you," he replied, his voice thick. She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a slow, deep, passionate kiss. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of two people in a storm. It was the kiss of two people who had found the shore. It was a kiss of healing, of promise, of a future. He kissed her back, his hands cupping her face, his touch a reverence. He lifted her, his arms strong, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her body molding to his. He carried her to the bedroom, the moonlight streaming in, painting the sheets in silver. They lay together, wrapped in the sheets, in the moonlight, two survivors, scarred and battered by the world, who had chosen each other. They had found their peace, not in the absence of danger, but in the presence of each other. They were healing together. Lena lay tucked against his side, her head on his chest, her hands splayed over his heart. The silence was perfect. "I used to dance to survive," she whispered into the darkness, her voice soft and clear. He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her, holding her safe. "Now I dance," she finished, a small, sleepy smile touching her lips, "because I'm alive." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed the journey with Lena and Nico. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. Please let us know by leaving a comment below. If you like stories like this, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for new releases every week. And finally, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. Please share your feelings in English in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you again.